Main event. I have the privilege today of introducing you to a very special person, Susan Stamberg, a founding mother of National Public Radio, NPR. Welcome, Susan. It's so good to be with you.
You know, we used to be together all the time, and then you had to go retire.
Well, I have to say I'm enjoying retirement, but I miss so much all the great colleagues at NPR.
Yeah.
And, you know, I miss the news stories sometimes too.
Yeah, well, they've been so dreary for such a long time that they're hard. It's hard to miss them. You know, you sort of get a lot of people are just simply not paying attention anymore because they've got it, feeling it up to here. And I'm certainly sympathetic to it, but that's so dangerous. You really do have to kind of keep tab. But you know what's happening, John? I realize more and more as more and more people leave, and that's what's happening. Your generation hit 65 and out, they were out the door, and others who've been around for a while. Never me, by the way. I will never retire, mostly because I can't live without the techies who teach me. I call them 4 times a day to help me out
with your
my
computer.
Right. But so there's kind of an attrition that's happening. People are, plus the lockdown throughout the pandemic, it just doesn't feel the way it did.
Yeah.
Slowly it's repopulating, and people are starting to show up again. And but what we're doing, and this is what I wanted to tell you, but also the folks who are with us, because to me it's an incredible phenomenon. We won't give each other up. I mean, you and your wife and I have been together often since you left, and we're gathering in groups. Somebody started a Martini Monday.
Oh yes, very popular.
Very popular. It's very nice. Others just in small clusters. It's as if we don't want to give up that sense of our community. I can understand that it's partly because all of this free time is new, and you kind of a little apprehensive about giving up the old. Yeah, but my prediction is it's going to last because it was such an extraordinary collection of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now I just told all of you I was going to introduce our speaker, but of course, many of you already know her very well. When she was hosting All Things Considered back in the 1970s and 80s, you invited her into your home or car every afternoon or evening, and later she visited you on Sunday morning as host of NPR's Weekend Sunday. In the past few years, you've heard her warm and wonderful voice introducing you to artists and their work on all of NPR's programs. One other thing you may not know, Susan was the first woman to host a daily broadcast news program. She's won every major award in broadcasting and been inducted into the Broadcasting Hall of Fame.
You know, it's exhausting to hear that. I mean, I always need a nap after, right?
Well, it's been a wonderful career. And I think a lot of people, people have loved you for all those years, but many people don't know how you got started. I mean, how did you get started in radio? What drew you to radio?
I began very young at the kitchen table in our apartment in Manhattan. That's where I grew up. Although I know you can't tell from my accent, you think I'm a Southern belle, but no. Sitting at the kitchen table with the Bakelite white Emerson radio, listening to it and being transported by it. There was no television then in those days, but radio had everything it could possibly offer, except the kinds of things you're hearing now on NPR, and you've heard for the last 50 years now. But it was my world, and I couldn't wait. I was so happy every time I got a cold and got kept home and taken to bed, because my mother would move the radio into my bedroom so that I could listen all day. And, you know, I still do. I own, how many radios do you have, John?
Oh, I can't count them on all my fingers. I don't have enough fingers. I have lots of radios.
Me too.
Plus computers where I can stream NPR now.
Right,
So,
there's sound from everywhere. Well,
But-
I have physical radios, still 8 of them. At my last count, ridiculous. There has to be an easier way to listen than to have these instruments, but I won't give them up. And they're quite beautiful and they have good sound, very good sound. But anyway, it started that young, in
Mhm.
love with it. Never thought, because it was the glamour medium of my childhood with no television. You know, it was Edward R. Murrow eventually, once World War II began, and the radio dramas and the things that Murray Horowitz is doing now on WAMU on Sunday evening, all those old radio shows with the sound effects and all. So I never thought about a career in it because it was untouchable. I mean, it was up there somewhere. Little me doing that. So I sort of fell into it happily, and luckily I got bored by my first job in Washington, D.C., which was at the New Republic magazine. And for women of my generation, the opportunities were you got married, or you could be a teacher, or you could type. So I was married, and the next step was the constant step, and I was always a good typist. And that's what I did on the New Republic until I got bored and started calling around and found out about what turned out to be the precursor of NPR, a skinny little network that just went up the East Coast, and called and called and called for a job until the manager then, George Ydstie, I'm sure it was WAMU.
right?
I was calling, that was my last call, but I was calling all over the place constantly. And until, I'm sure what happened to him was he got so sick and tired of my persistent phone calls, he hired me just to shut me up. And that's what was my glamorous entry. So I didn't have to type as much.
So what did you do at WAMU? Were you a reporter right away?
No, I was behind, I didn't do any air work at all. I did behind the scenes, I was a producer and eventually produced a weekly public affairs discussion show out of DC for this little network, which was national, but it only had 12 different members.
So you were like a person on the Diane Rehm show who would be booking guests.
Book the guests,
yeah.
Right? Talk with the host.
Right.
Suggest maybe some questions, although he was so smart and so good, he didn't need my help at all. And it was all current events. And I did that for about a year or two, I guess. And then the manager, I was the only, everybody was a student there but me. They were all, I graduated from AU, I never went there. The manager left. And so I became the manager. I was totally unqualified, totally. I didn't have a clue what to do, but I went in and I managed. And to the regret probably of every Washington listener, I'm the one who first did fundraising. And I didn't know enough to think to do it on the air, you know, which now we do constantly. Yeah. We got envelopes printed up, stamped, self-addressed, mailed them out to our mailing list of subscribers, about 63 people. And it came utterly no money. We didn't raise anything. And then the last day, a check came in for $1,000.
Wow, imagine that.
And I thought, there's a lot of power to this.
Yeah.
But it took time for it to occur to me. And I don't know that other stations were doing it, to do it on the air. And now they do it so much that everybody gets tired of it, unfortunately, but it's essential, you folks, and you know this better than anybody, to keep us on the air and to keep, you knew that the pitch was going to come to you,
Yes.
that the time would come when we couldn't go on without you, really.
So how about getting to NPR? You were at WAMU, which is the station here in Washington.
Yes.
And but then you made your way to National Public Radio, although it hadn't been created yet when you started in NPR, right?
Right. Yes, it existed on paper.
Right.
But the man who ran that skinny little network, Don Quayle, his name was, but I have to stop because we once had a vice president named Dan Quayle. But Don Quayle was the head of NPR, the first NPR president. And he was the head of that skinny network first. So we knew each other. And so I could call him every week and nag him to hire me, please. And he did. So
Now,
that's,
a lot of people don't know, one interesting story about the beginning, though, was that there almost wasn't a public radio. We got added into the public radio or the television legislation.
the public broadcasting.
Public broadcasting legislation at the last moment.
Incredible. Somebody
Yeah.
came, in my mind, somebody came with a pen, leaned over Lyndon Johnson's shoulder because he was
Just
signing
before
the
we
act.
signed it.
Yeah, and drew a little carrot and radio.
Yeah,
And that's how it happened that we got included as well, because they were after television, they were very focused on it. But we're the ones who are thriving and producing programs to this day, far more than public television.
yeah, as a network.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. So you got, Don Quayle gave you a job.
He did.
You showed up at NPR, which was downtown Washington, DC,
Right.
near the Christian Science Monitor.
Right, which I'm told doesn't exist in Rampant.
Yeah, they had an office building down there, right?
I think it was the church.
It was the church itself,
Yes,
in the
indeed.
basement of the
We were
church.
being blessed, no, in the big building.
And what did you do? Did he put you right on the air because he
Oh,
heard your
no.
wonderful voice and
No,
said,
no,
this
no.
woman needs to be on the air?
By then, I'm trying to remember, I was doing, no, I had done some on-air work at WAMU,
Mhm.
mostly substituting when people, I was by then producing a daily program for their air.
Mhm.
But if somebody couldn't appear on the program or somebody couldn't come in that day, I would step in. And this is a very long story, which I won't tell you. But my radio debut was as the weather girl. Oh yeah, on this the program that I was producing, because she got sick one day and there was a slot. There were maybe 2 minutes devoted to weather.
Mhm.
Somebody had to do it. It was up to me.
Mhm.
But at NPR, I was hired to be a producer. That is a person who I wasn't getting guests in at that point. I was cutting metallic tape, which is how we recorded then, not on little digital cards.
It was actually plastic tape with a metal
Good for you.
binding. It was not, we were not on wire. They used to have these wire tape recorders, you know.
I know.
Anyway.
Incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, yeah, right. So it was that tape, and and you cut it with a razor blade to get rid of the parts you didn't like, dump them on the floor, and put the two together again with little sticky tape. And that I was very good at that.
Mhm.
So that was my job. And Linda Wertheimer and I came at exactly the same time. She's another founding mother. She's actually, I love to say this, 2 weeks senior to me,
Wow.
although I am infinitely older than she is. But somebody has to have gotten there before I did.
So you were
we were-
both cutting tape by
Right.
that time, had All Things Considered and
Yes,
created? Yes.
we were there for the creation. Let's see, we both came in April, and we went on the air in May 3rd. So can you imagine, in a month, that was it, the staff had to work and get this together with no reporters, 5 reporters, that was it, and no resources at all. But there were a lot of very bright things that the founders of us did. And one was because we had nobody do foreign reporting. But the earliest managers made an arrangement with the Christian Science Monitor, which was
Oh,
a
I
very
remember
good
that.
newspaper in those days.
Right.
And so we had access to their reporters, and they were a global organization. They had people everywhere. So anytime there was news, even in Ouagadougou, you could call a Monitor reporter and put them on the air. And that was an inspired solution at the beginning, before we had our own. And Robert Siegel was the very first foreign reporter,
Right.
that foreign correspondent. He opened our bureau in London.
Right. Now, so you were there cutting tape for interviews, but then you ended up getting a job as the host of All Things Considered.
Yeah,
How did that happen?
It was after a while. First, I just started doing radio work itself, doing a lot of people on the street interviews, and then speaking around them on the air. And then I was sitting in for the regular host, a fellow named Mike Waters. He was going on vacation, and he said to somebody, "Susan sounds good on the air. Why doesn't she sit in for me while I'm on vacation? That's how it happened. And it turned out he had a lot of radio experience, but I probably had more than anybody because of sitting, once the manager left, who'd been doing the daily program I was producing, I started doing it. So I was on every day for a long time. And I was sort of easier with the microphone than any of them.
Well, you sound great on the air. You sound great on the air then and now.
Thanks. Thank you.
I should, I'm going to tell you a story about my beginnings in radio.
Good.
It
I love
involves
this.
you.
Oh, I love this story.
I grew up along the Canadian border and went to college up there. And I was a college student when I came home. Well, let me preface this by saying, at that time, the CBC was doing really wonderful programming, a program called As It Happens, which still exists. Another great program called This Country in the Morning was also wonderful. And so my wife and I both fell in love with radio because of that. And I remember as a student walking into my apartment one day, and my wife, Mary Jo, had the radio on, and there was a voice coming out of the radio, and it sounded just a little bit like a woman named Barbara Frum,
Yes.
who was the host of As It Happens. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. And pretty soon I realized this is not As It Happens, this is a different program. And it was a national public radio program. But I heard your voice, and it caught me immediately and made me want to be a part of it. I mean, I was in love with radio, and I just thought, and it turns out they were putting a public radio station on. They were building a public radio station on my college campus. And the person they sent to put it on the air was a man named Bill Seamering, who wrote the mission statement for NPR as its first program director and launched All Things Considered.
He did. Wow.
And so I said, I'd love to get involved. Can I have an internship? And he gave me an internship. And later, I was going to go to law school, and my wife wanted to finish graduate work, so I delayed that, and I got a job doing a little program called Our Hometown, which sent me with a microphone and a recorder out into North Dakota to do sound portraits of 5 little towns. And by the time that was over, I decided, I don't want to be a lawyer. I want to be a journalist and a broadcaster.
Wow.
But your voice,
I'm thrilled to take credit for getting you into it.
You caught so many people. And I think if there is a founding mother NPR, it is you, because I think without you, Susan, we might not have gotten the critical mass necessary to weather all the storms that we had.
Well, I hope that's true.
Yeah,
that's
but
really
you're warm, infectious, intelligent, good-humored self really attracted people. And I know there are people out there listening who feel exactly the same way.
Thank you very much.
But tell us a little bit more about what it was like every day to have to show up at 5 o'clock and do a radio program back in the
with all things
in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah. Well, it was glorious fun. It was hang by your thumbs. It was, oh my God, what are we going to do here? Because we started as a 90-minute program. And there were days when if we had 20 minutes, we were lucky. And as a matter of fact, I used to think, and I used to tell it to people too, there were days in which we really not only didn't we have enough material, but there wasn't anything very important to share on the radio. I felt, and I used to say, today, I think we ought to do a 20-minute program and release you, go hug your children, make a nice dinner, do what you want to. We're not going to tie you up in any way. Have a good time.
Mhm.
But alas, we could never do that. I have to tell you, because it's sticking in my head. Barbara Frum, whom you mentioned, who was the CBC anchor, and I've never met her. I admired her instantly when I heard her. We had the same birthday.
Oh my
What are
goodness.
the chances of that?
Separated at birth.
It must have been.
Yeah.
And her son, David Frum, is a
Leading conservative commentator.
he certainly is.
Yeah.
He certainly is. He writes columns now. He was on our air. I think he was on Morning just fairly regularly
Yeah.
for quite some time too.
Yeah.
So isn't that funny?
Yeah. But tell us a little bit how NPR evolved from the 70s when you were struggling
Yeah, to
just to fill
fill
time
the time.
into the 80s when you continued to do All Things Considered, but another program was created, Morning Edition.
Yeah.
Tell us about that, because my recollection is that there was a little bit of sibling rivalry.
Oh, you
between-
bet. It was major. It was major. First of all, you ran that program for quite a while.
I did,
as well,
yeah.
right? But at first, they kept stealing all the ATC, really good ATC people.
Bob Edwards, for instance.
Bob was the newscaster for All Things Considered, and morning started with different hosts who didn't last, and so they were desperately looking around for substitutes. And there was Bob sitting in the newscast chair, and they moseyed in. We shared an office into our office, and they had a very hush-hush discussion with him, and said, "But it'll only be until November." This was maybe June or so. When did it go on there? I don't remember.
May.
Okay.
No. When did Morning Edition go on
Yeah.
there? I can't remember.
Well,
it was
just
right at the time of the Iran hostage crisis.
That's
I believe
right.
it was in the fall
That
of
was your-
'79.
That was your first broadcast,
Yeah.
as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Mornings.
That's right, when the
What a way to go
hostages were
on.
taken.
You went
That's
on
right.
with real news, right? But and they told him that it's only going to be for a few months, and goodbye, and you'll be back. I thought, they take my host, co-host, they take 3 producers. I mean, we had just struggled to get a reasonable and good staff going for us on All Things Considered. And there they went. So I didn't put out a big welcome mat, I have to tell you, when this other program, and I always considered ours the real program. And these other early morning people, parvenu, they were.
Well, what I remember then, when I got to Washington, I wasn't there when Morning Edition first went on the air. I was driving down the freeway with a U-Haul truck moving to Washington, and I had to have a transistor radio set on the dashboard because the U-Haul truck didn't have a radio. But I was listening to this new program. It was kind of like a homing beacon. But I got a job as an editor, and very quickly ended up being the Washington editor. And one of the real struggles for us with a new program in the morning was that ultimately, first of all, they said it was going to be done. The reporters would go out, do their stories for All Things Considered, then hand the raw material over to producers at Morning Edition so that they could create a morning program. Well, that did not work very well.
Right.
So pretty soon, the reporters were doing stories for the afternoon and
the morning. And again, the staff is told it won't make any difference. They're not going to have reporter stories. You don't need to talking to the reporters. You don't have to worry. It won't be extra work. And Cokie Roberts used to say, they lied.
And they did.
And they did.
And I was the Washington editor then, and I was the one who had to coax or bring the bad news to Cokie and Linda
Right.
and Nina.
Right.
You're going to have to do a story for the morning too.
Right. And they did.
And they did.
So it was very, it was really, those days were very, early days were exhilarating because you could do anything, and you needed to sometimes because there was such a desperation for material. But so thrilling to have that process of invention and experimentation. And what was Linda calls it, and she's absolutely right, we were a startup. I mean, it wasn't a phrase we knew in those days, but we were, and you could just try anything and see what would work.
Was there ever a time in those early days when you felt like this just isn't going to work? I mean, I have to, I'm going to have to call Mutual Radio, or I'm going to have to
Yeah.
call CBS Television for a job.
No, I was never interested in television. I would have had to comb my hair. You know, who wants to do that every day? But no, I've never found television nearly as interesting as radio.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I used to always say the pictures are always so much better on the radio because we create them in our minds, and there's no way that reality can live up to them. So no, I wasn't ever tempted like that.
Let me just say, toward the end of our I was going to say broadcast, but this is not a broadcast. Toward the end of our program, we're going to try to take some questions. And if you have a question, go to the chat room on your screen and write a question in the chat room, and we will try to get to it sometime in just, I don't know, where are we in our program? Oh, we're almost halfway through.
Good
We've got a
heavens.
lot more to do.
Oh.
Well, I want to ask you, tell me some of your favorite interviews,
Yikes.
favorite things that you put on the air.
Well, I interviewed Mel Brooks once. I have to confess, and regular listeners would probably have noticed it, that I was never really a news hen, ever. I did it because that was the job description, and I did it as well as I could. But I was never free in it the way Robert Siegel, for example, was, who lived and breathed news.
Right.
I never did that. It was always a discipline for me, and it was tough.
But part of the thing about that is you were asking questions that regular people
Yeah.
wanted to have the answer
Right,
to.
right.
So you were a surrogate for all those folks out there who just wanted to keep up.
Well, I think that's right, and I felt that way too. But my heart was always with the arts, always. And so, and I was the one who would insist that we put that dramatist on the air, and put that painter on the air, and put the jazz player on it. You know, just the world, bring the world of the arts down from some elitist shelf and into people's lives on a regular basis. And that was the icing on the cake for me at the end of every day, if I knew that the day would end with an interview with some fabulous creative person. That came to me very young too. Sitting at the table with the Emerson Bakelite, I was always drawing or painting or doing something like that in New York.
And this is what you're doing now.
And I'm so lucky that this is what I do now. I get to wallow in all the things that I most deeply care about. That part is great, and they let me do it. Amazing.
Now there was a time when NPR almost did cease to exist. In the early 80s,
Yeah.
we had a new president, Frank Mankiewicz, who had been Robert F. Kennedy's spokesperson, and was a big player in Washington and in politics. And he became our president and decided that we needed to be a little bit more newsy. We were more of an alternative, I think, back in the 70s. And as we progressed into the 80s, we became a major news organization.
Well, or tried to be. That is to say, we hired reporters, more than the original 5. So suddenly we had resources like that. We had people out in the world with equipment who could look and see what was happening and report it back. And that really gave the fuel. But in the beginning, what we did with no resources at all was to analyze, to say what yesterday's news or today's event would mean and what it would forecast. And that's what some of the stuff that we did with the Christian Science Monitor reporters, but we didn't have to, we still do that. You'll hear a lot of analysis still on our air, but we didn't have to have it be that huge percentage that it was when we started. And Mankiewicz was very instrumental in that. And it started being structured the way a newspaper is, with desks a Washington desk that focuses on the news that was going on here, national and foreign. And to this day, though, but it's so expanded now. We've got people with incredible titles. I'm not even going to remember, but there are people who follow truth and truth from public speakers, who look to see, do fact checking, but that's their beat, is to take a look and see what's been said and whether it was correct or not. Just full-time jobs at it.
Yeah.
It takes my breath away.
Now, one of the things that happened with Mankiewicz, he was very entrepreneurial, and he wanted to have a 24-hour news program, so that we had all night long, we would have newscasts. And he started this kind of a separate unit to do that. There were several other entrepreneurial things that he tried to do, but then it turned out we didn't have the money to do this stuff. We had unfortunately a financial VP who was not keeping the books properly, and we ran out of money.
We had $8 million in debt, which was big money in those days. Now it's chicken feed for Donald Trump, if he's got that much. But then it was overwhelming to us, and CBS would send over paper for us, typing paper for us to use, and you'd go to work every day and wonder, is the door going to open? Because we hadn't paid the rent.
Right.
So
I think there was a time when we were like within a few hours of the door being locked in the 1980s.
Yes.
And it led to Frank's resignation and a couple other top news people, and the student or the stations, public stations, were the only ones able to raise money on the air.
Yes.
But they gave us dispensation to do it once to try to save.
Right, and we did. Noah Adams and I went on the air on All Things Considered. All the programs did this and just pitched. We knew how to do those fundraisers, and we did. So in 1 week, we raised $1 million. I remember Noah and I did it on All Things Considered, which, it was, God bless listeners. They kept us going and realized that they needed us in their lives, and they didn't want to live without us. So they pitched in and saved us. And Frank did, as you mentioned, he just did tremendous benefits for NPR. He raised our visibility because he came in so well known. He was the one who announced the death of Bobby Kennedy. Imagine doing a job like that, but he was known nationally. And so when he came to us, he himself got a lot of press, and that put NPR in the papers and enormous news. But John, the thing that really is astonishing to this day, and these are leaps of history now, is that we end up being the last woman standing, certainly in terms of electronic broadcasting, electronic news, that there's nothing comparable on television. Or certainly nowhere else on radio. And with the demise of the newspapers, and I can never talk about newspapers without doing this for some reason, because I still take 2 actual papers. I don't read on those little devices. But we never could have predicted that the papers would tank the way they did. And our stations have stepped in and beefed up their own local news reporting, because which was a task that those local papers used to do.
Right. Now we're now the daily newspaper in many small cities around the country.
Exactly, where there's no alternative.
No, and even there are the CNNs and the MSNBCs, but they don't have the reach that we have into everywhere in the country.
Yes.
And globally. I mean, we now, I think, have around 20 foreign correspondents all over the world.
It's incredible.
So it's quite incredible. Did you ever think it would get there?
I couldn't have given those numbers, but from the beginning, I was ambitious for what it should be and what I felt it had the potential to be. and would end up being. I never felt, what am I doing here? And I ought to go someplace else. There was no place better, I thought, no place freer or as committed or as serious about it. And we weren't selling things. You know, that was the great advantage.
Yeah.
And the other piece of it is objectivity. You know, those places you mentioned, MSNBC or Fox, or you know what their bias is. You know what they stand for. They're editorially very free and very persistent. And we really don't do that.
No.
We are as balanced and objective and fair as we possibly can be.
You know, one other thing I think that's really interesting and revolutionary about NPR is that we gave our product away for free and asked people to contribute if they liked it. You know, we there's no way we could, if once it's out on the airwaves, we can't bill people.
Yeah.
All we can do is say, if you like this, send in your checks and support us. And to this day, NPR and public radio get about half their income from people just sending in money.
It's astonishing.
It's astonishing that you could do that. And there are a number of web news services that have started in those ways too.
Right.
People have seen this business model and said, you know, we can't sell ads anymore. You know, let's do this.
Right.
So it's revolutionary.
It's different from the BBC also, which performs an incredible global news service. But you have to buy a license.
Yeah, you do.
In order to get the stations and hear them. I mean, there's a fee attached with it. We can't do that. That doesn't happen.
Yeah. Let's play a little game.
Okay.
I'm going to name some of our current and former NPR colleagues, who many people will probably recognize.
Right.
You give me a quick thing about them that comes to mind, or something people might not know about them.
Okay.
And let's start with Nina Totenberg.
I guess you always have to start with Totenberg.
She's always at the front of the line.
Or she'd elbow her way in here right now and tell you about it. Well, I call her, first of all, here's what they don't know, that she, when she was younger, growing up in Boston, sang with the band.
She did?
Yes, she did.
I didn't even know that.
She has a terrific
Oh,
voice.
yeah, I knew that.
Beautiful singing voice. I used to get her in to just sing themes of other programs sometimes when I couldn't find a recording of it. She'd go in and go la 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 and just do it. And she did that. Her father was a great violinist, and she comes by it honestly, I think. But the main thing about her, well, she's such a solid reporter, and she is indefatigable. I call her the Energizer Bunny, and I even call it to her face, because she's a little bit younger than I, but not that much. And she's got the energy of 23 12-year-olds.
Yeah.
She never quits, and she forges ahead and accomplishes. Now she's got this best-selling book.
Best-selling book.
Fabulous.
Her relationship with Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Right. Called, let's put in a plug for Dinners with Ruth. It's called.
Yeah.
Great title, by the way.
All right. Another founding mother, Cokie Roberts.
Oh, well, Cokie is who we all wanted to be. You know, she was perfection in a person. She was the daughter of politicians, the child of the Congress, because her father, Hale Boggs, was a member. And then when he was killed in a plane crash, her mother, Lindy, took over that seat and stayed in the Congress for quite a long time. So she had the instincts of the best politician you could ever meet. In fact, you would dream to come upon a politician like Cokie,
right,
because her values were so solid and her judgment was so good that for years now, since she died, we will look at each other sometimes and say, what would Cokie do? And she gave you that kind of strength and guidance that resonates with us. I mean, sometimes when I think that, the answer comes to me, because I think, okay, that's what she'd do. Doesn't come enough. I wish I'd added more.
Another founding mother,
Yeah.
Linda Wertheim.
Well, Linda, to me, I have been urging Linda to write a Gothic Western.
Ah,
For
she's from the
years.
West,
She's from
New Mexico.
Carlsbad, New Mexico,
Right.
a grocer's daughter. And she tells the story, I love this, of coming to be hired at NPR and talking to Bill Siemering. And he not looking very impressed, or he wasn't a big fan, all of a sudden he was not overwhelmed in the course of an interview. And she quickly thought about, what is this about? What is this about? And she told him that she was the daughter of a grocer, and she used to do the deliveries in that small town. She'd take the groceries to people's houses. And otherwise she was standing behind the counter and running up the cash register. Right. And that got her hired. And it was God's truth. But the thing is, he didn't want people from fancy schools, and she was from Wellesley, as was Cokie. And he didn't want rich people. He wanted people on his staff. And once she said she was the grocer's daughter, that's how she got the job. Terrific. And she turned out to be just such a solid political and congressional reporter.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Bill Siemering.
Yeah.
Most people may not know him. But he wrote the mission statement for NPR. That was a very different kind of view of what broadcast news ought to be about. It was about telling the little people's story, essentially.
Yes, exactly, rather than just the power brokers.
Right.
Right. Yeah. He knew that, and putting, I don't like little people, but ordinary people on the air and letting us hear each other.
Right.
And let us talk across the country to one another. These were all Bill's emphases.
And he understood the power of the human voice. This is what I learned from him as a young reporter up in Moorhead, Minnesota. The intimate, evocative nature of the human voice and how it can be even more powerful than pictures.
Yes, I believe it.
Yeah.
It just hits your emotion. Well, Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, with whom I knew and did some television work with, used to say that it's the power is the mother's voice. It's the first thing we hear. I mean, whether it's a man or woman, you hear the human voice, but in particular the mother's voice. And so you latch onto it in ways that you don't in other situations, and it goes deeper. And radio, just as a medium, is so naked. It's so specific and so intimate. If you think about where people listen to it in the shower and wherever they are, that we work our way into people's systems in ways that television doesn't and other media do not.
We've talked about several women, and NPR was a place where women could get started.
You bet.
Right.
Absolutely.
Back in the days, it was much more difficult for women to find a job at a top news organization back in the 70s and 80s.
Nina and Linda does too, tells the story of job hunting. This was never my experience for reasons I really don't understand, but going after jobs and being told we already have our woman. And it was never to be on the air. It was to be behind the scenes. Linda worked for a while at the BBC and told stories about women she was not on the air, women going out to do interviews, chase down news, record it, come back, write the story, and voice the story, and remove the women's voices and give the scripts to the men to do. So there was no, what's the term, agency. Women had no agency in the work that they were doing in those days at the BBC, which was like the mothership. Right. Good heavens, they set the tone for everybody. But we were ahead on that too. And the earliest staff, anything went. And also the other piece was, if we were married, there were 2 salaries, so we could afford the low salaries. The men didn't stick around that long at NPR because the salaries were so low. Yeah. But the married women could stay like me forever because the husbands we're pulling in some money as well.
No, there are a couple of men who did stick around. Robert Siegel was one of them.
Yeah.
Tell us about Robert.
Well, he came in. These are just such embarrassing stories. Somebody brought me, David Maltbus it was, he was the news director. He brought me a cassette, an air check of somebody who wanted the job of newscaster at NPR. And he played it for me. And I said, oh, never, really. I mean, he's got that funny, whiny voice. And it's just, there's a little New York, that's me, pot calling the kettle, but there's a little New York tinge to it. And I don't think so. So, of course, I said the same thing about Diane Rehm. I told her she was crazy to do a daily program. I have been wrong so many more times than I've ever been correct. But anyway, for some reason they hired him. And his father was a school principal.
Right.
And I learned that very late in my knowledge of Robert, but it made complete sense to me because he's got that brilliance, that pursuit of information, that I would go to him with ethical. We went to journalism school at Columbia, and he was an undergraduate there too. I would go to him with ethical problems about questioning or a story that I was working on, and he always knew, always had the answer. He's that way to this day. He's kind of a quiet brilliance, the son of a principal who just knows things and has great judgment.
What about Scott Steiner?
Scott is a performer, and you get to be the audience, and you're lucky. You're lucky.
You're lucky. Yes.
That's right. He takes your breath away with what he writes, because his essays are just often so spectacular. He's been doing this. I've lost track now. I put 1987. I put Weekend Sunday on the air, and he was already on with Saturday. He must have
for a couple of years.
Yeah,
I think,
he must have done it around 85.
Yeah.
So think of that.
Yeah.
Solid.
Almost.
How
Can you
many
do
is
the
it?
no 30 years?
Yeah, that's an extraordinary record.
Another woman, Rachel Martin.
John, honestly, I think she's the best we've ever had.
Wow.
Male, female,
Wow.
whatever. She is, to my ear, the ideal host of a morning edition, because she has the range. She has all of it. She was a congressional reporter, so she's got those chops whenever any subjects, national or international subjects, come up. But also, she
was
has
an international reporter too.
Where
Not
was-
for us, but I think she was in Moscow for a while.
oh my goodness.
For one of the news, NBC News or something, before she
didn't know.
came. She started as a freelancer for public radio, then went to television, and then came back.
Oh my
Now,
gosh.
but she is fantastic.
She's fantastic. Her
Yeah.
heart is in her mouth when it needs to be.
Yeah.
And you just hear, she just compels you to listen. She gets so engaged with the people she's talking about. She never phones it in. And especially, I admired her so much through the worst of the pandemic, when everybody was working at home. And she's got children there. She's got young children at home. I think her husband was working at home as well. So all of these balls that she had to bounce at the same time, and she never dropped one.
Yeah.
She has everything you dream of for a host. She's got it.
So let's go to questions. And I have a question here. Can you talk about how turducken became a Thanksgiving staple? And I don't think you can.
No.
I think someone wants to know about
No.
Grandma Stamberg's
God.
relish.
God. I never get away from without that on one of these things. But I have had turducken. Bob Mondello took me to a friend's house who was in great excitement, was preparing turducken. Do you know what that is? It's a duck shoved inside a turkey.
A duck, turkey.
And something else.
There's the third thing.
The turkey.
Turkey, duck, and chicken. Turkey, duck, chicken, turkey. turkey, duck,
It's
chicken. Yeah, I think so.
And it doesn't taste busy. It didn't taste too busy either. It was pretty good. Mostly, the funny saying in China, anything, because you think, what is this, snake? Anything sliced thin enough tastes like chicken. Well, so does the turducken.
Yeah. Well, you have a Thanksgiving special
I do.
every year.
Every year I have done my late mother-in-law's recipe, and it turns out not to have been hers at all, for cranberry relish. It's quite unusual. And I find it, has it ever appeared in this household?
Yes, it has.
How
Yeah.
many times?
It's very brilliant pink.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
think once.
That's people, I mean, yes. But I have it every year, more than that, I put it on the radio every year and I started that at WAMU, so it's been a long time I've been loyal to that recipe, which turns out to have been from Craig Claiborne when he was the food editor of the New York Times, and he published it. And then Mama Stamberg, my late mother-in-law Marjorie, got it from her sister-in-law, Marie Salinger. And both of them were annoyed at me for giving the credit. One said, no, it was mine, and the other said, no, it was mine.
Family trouble.
And I brought Craig Claiborne on the air and said, listen, I've been conducting this terrible lie, not unbeknownst to me, on the air for all these years. And he said, Susan, he was such a lovely Southern gentleman. Susan, he said, you've gotten more mileage out of that recipe than I ever have. Go ahead, do it.
You have someone help you every year.
Yes.
Who was your favorite?
Well, he just died. The one I was thinking about it, Coolio. Do you know who?
Really?
I had him 1 year.
1 year?
I wrote people in to do it with me, and they don't know that I'm going to ask them to do it. We come in under the guise of something else that we're going to talk about, and I sneak it in and I get them to read it. Actually, two of them just died. The White House pastry chef, I can't remember his name.
Oh.
He just died too, but he was great. I had a lot of the White House chefs on, and we talked about cooking for Nancy Reagan, for this one, for that one. And at one point I passed my recipe along and got each of them to look at it and speak about it. And the White House chef, the pastry chef, looked at it, read the recipes and said, and then you tear it up and you never look at it again. Here's why, because in addition to cranberries, of course, and sugar, of course, there's horseradish, and the horseradish is the really weird part. And then onions and well, you have to listen the Friday before Thanksgiving, because that's when I do it every year, by gum.
Well, I think we're touching all the right questions, because that was the only question so far. There are a couple of comments. I thank you for those. I wanted to ask you a little bit about where we are today.
Wow.
And that is in the whole world of podcasting.
Yes.
One of the things that happened at NPR during the early 2000s was that we were a part of this podcasting revolution. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, it seems like it's a real endorsement of what we've been doing all this time, which is audio.
Yes.
Do you feel the same way?
Yes. Yeah. And those radios, my 8 or 9 radios, they'll disappear, but there will always be audio. There will always be somebody telling a story and being heard, hopefully. The form of it will be different and the platform will be different, but that will continue. And now that honor seems to be going to podcasts. I'm not sure how much longer the actual broadcast programs are going to exist. Mm-hmm. Our morning magazine programs and the evening program. I think those are expensive because they have big staffs. Podcasts are not so expensive. And the key, John, and this really took my breath away when I heard about it just recently, those podcasts are bringing money in, the likes of which we could not have dreamt.
Really?
Yes. Millions
to
of
NPR.
Dollars to NPR, well, and to the stations, right, and the whole establishment. So they are money makers, more collectively than money that comes in, not from foundations, but from every other source,
Mhm.
including listeners and including, I believe, station dues.
Mhm.
It-
Wow.
It's phenomenal.
Wow.
Steve Ydstie was telling me this the other day. It's
Mhm.
just been millions and millions of dollars, which does not mean you shouldn't make your contribution,
No.
because
No,
we're very,
please.
we're very dependent on our listeners as well. But I think that is the future. And I have very mixed feelings about that. I don't listen to them. I don't have enough time. I listen to our broadcasts. I'm obligated to, I feel, but also because that's how I get informed. But I feel in a way it's wonderful, the success that they're having, but it separates us. It's more of the Me Tooism and me-ism that I think permeates the society right now and will for a long time. That is, give me what I want, not, and don't expose me. Don't make me have to listen to the things I'm not interested in. Well, you need to know those things, whether you're interested or not.
That's why they called it All Things Considered.
You bet.
Right? It
Yes.
wasn't just the things you wanted to hear, it was things you might not have considered before.
Yes, yes.
No, I think you're right. I mean, in some ways, I feel like it's a return to this sort of the concept that Bill Siemering had when he put All Things Considered on the air, and that is longer form interviews, more in depth, stories that could take some time, not necessarily, the breaking news stories. And in some ways, I think it's sort of the golden age of audio now.
It is.
But you're right. It also, that there's a danger, and that is that you'll go looking for, and the algorithms will send you to things that you want to hear, and your world will not be broadened in the same way that my world was broadened when I was a young student listening to All Things Considered back in the early or late 1970s.
Right. Well, I'm so glad you were doing that because it brought you to us.
Yeah, and it's been so much fun to talk to you today.
It's great to
Thank you
talk
very
with
much,
you.
Susan.
Thank you, John. Bye, everybody.
We must keep meeting like this.
Oh, okay. Good.
And thanks to all of you out there on Zoom for being such a good audience. We'll have another speakers forum in November with former New York Times journalist and author David Shipler.
Ooh.
And we hope you join us for that.
Nice.
Again, thanks to all of you for being with Chevy Chase at Home today. I invite you to explore other programming listed on our website and to consider joining your local village as a member or a volunteer. And this is not NPR, but I'm John Ydstie.
Well, I'm NPR,
And you're still Susan Stamberg.
That doesn't change.
Bye-bye.
Bye.